Hello, here is this month's project for Craft Fair Makes, quick and easy, and it's a little purse with a strap having no fastening for popping all sorts of things in there to hold them nice and safely and in a pretty way. So what do we need? We need one strip of fabric. One strip of fabric which is 26 inches long by 6 inches wide, and I've actually put some G700 woven interfacing on the reverse just to give it a little bit more body. Now the first thing we need to do is press it nicely, and if you're using G700 you will need to use no steam at all. Mine I cut slightly narrower at 5.5 inches, just to give a little seam allowance at either side, so I wasn't having the actual interfacing in the seam allowances. So the first thing we need to do is fold our fabric in half, right sides together, so that you've got the wrong side facing, lining up the raw edges here, and then from the folded edge I'm going to use a ruler and a pen. The marking doesn't matter because it's going to be hidden, and I'm going to make a mark 4.5 inches from that folded edge, and we'll make a little mark across here so that I can see exactly where I'm going to do a little bit of folding. So perhaps a pin might be handy to put at that top edge where the raw edges are, up here. And we're going to just take one layer, so just open it up just that little bit, so you're taking one layer and pinch at those markings. And so if we pinch on those, just to give it a little fold, and then take that fold and line it up with that top raw edge. So push your fingers down on there to hold it, and then at the side, if you turn it towards you so that you can see that fold that we've just pulled up to the top raw edges there, and then just flatten the rest of it down so there's that little fold at the bottom. So the marking I pressed originally has gone. So we're popping that down there, and then I'm going to bring this top fold back down and just about lines up with that, or make it line up with that bottom fold just here. And we'll take that pin out and we'll pop the pin in the bottom here to hold those two folds together. And let's find another pin for the other side. So just line those folds up and pop a pin in there to hold it together. Now what you will find is there, when you line up your raw edges here, there is a slight difference. So what we're going to do is trim that away like so, so that they both match, and we can discard that. And then we are going to fold this top edge together because we're going to curve these side edges here. So I've lined that up, the raw edges, and you can either place a curve, a circular, anything that's circular on the top here and make a mark, or you can just cut yourself a curve, because this is going to create a curved flap, and then when you open that out you've got a curved top. So we'll just lay that down again, and we can pop a pin in there, and we'll put a pin this side, because what we are going to do is we are going to leave a gap along that edge. So that little bit there is a gap. We're going to stitch here and stitch here, but first of all, before we do that, we need to make the little bar which goes across to create our closure. So I had a 4 inch I've actually put G700 on here, but you don't need to. A 4-inch width of fabric that is 7 inches long. I folded it in half and pressed it. I then opened it out and I folded the raw edges into that centre crease and pressed, and then the other side and pressed, and then folded it in half and pressed again so that those folded edges line up. I'm now just going to stitch along this edge, and just to hold that together I'm going to increase my stitch length to 3, and then just stitch along there, and these end bits are going to be cut off, so you don't need to cut the thread, just stitch across the short end and carry on stitching. Okay, so there we have a little band which is going to be the closure. So what do we need to do? I know I've put pins in here, but I'm just going to take those out because we're going to lift that up. In actual fact, I'm going to take this one out as well, and we're going to lift that up, whoops, like so. And here is what is going to be our pocket. So I'm going to place my band on top of that pocket. I'm going to make sure that it is straight and parallel with what is going to be our little pocket. And then I'm going to replace this piece back down so that those top edges align, but I'm also going to put a pin through our bar, our closure there, and swivel that around, and I'm just going to recheck that that's nice and straight. Just move that down just a tiny bit and replace that over the top, and we can put a pin in there to hold it, and then just make sure that this all lines up around here. So pop a pin back in there. I'm just going to, that just looks a little bit, not that it will matter, just round it off a little bit more. Now all we're going to do is we're going to stitch from the bottom all the way up around here. I'll put another pin just as a reminder, and we're going to stop. So we're going to leave a gap at the top of the flap for turning. So under the needle, and I'm going to start with a reversing and then 1/4 inch seam allowance, and we'll stitch over there, and we'll come around, slowly around the curve, and when we get to that pin we're going to stop, a couple of back stitches just to hold that for when we are turning, and then start again, a couple of reverse stitches, and we'll go around this curve as well. Around we go, down the other side. Take your pin out as you come to that pin in that bar, and reverse at the end. Okay, so all we do now, we're going to trim this seam back just a tiny bit, and also trim off the bar. Just come around here, trim it around the curve, which will help with giving us a nice curve to our flap. But don't trim away where our gap is, it makes it easier to tuck that in. So start just around the curve again, and down that side, and down to our closure again, and then at these bottom corners we can just give that a little trim off of those points so that we can have a nice or a fairly pointed corner. So having done that, we can then pop our fingers between the gap in our flap and turn this through. So just push all those pieces through. You don't have to use interfacing. As I say, it just makes it a little bit sturdier, gives it a little bit more body. Obviously when you're turning it through, it's not as easy, it's not difficult, but it's not as easy as if it had no interfacing at all. So let's just have a look here. So let's just push our fingers into those corners, and we'll do a little bit more in a moment. But as you've seen, there's no lining required. One piece of fabric, and I'm just going to get the end of a paintbrush to pop in here just to smooth out those curves there and around this side too. And you can see our purse beginning to form. So I'm going to place this inside, and actually we'll go through our gap in that flap there just to be able to push that out. So you get yourself a nice little point at the corners. And there, see that there's our flap, there's our top of the pocket, and all we need to do is just tuck. We need to press this and tuck the raw edges in here, so we can just fold that piece, and I'm just pushing that with my nails there, because we want that to be a nice straight edge that you wouldn't even know that it had been left as a turning gap. So we can just hold that. I will put a pin in there just to hold that together whilst I push in these other little bits here. So let's just push that in, roll that, the edge of the flap, and then push that in as well. Just make them line up really neatly. So push that in. There we go, that one's lining up now as well. And we can have a few pins along here just to get a nice neat finish, and that looks fine there too. I'm just going to take it to the iron just to give that a little press, and just to get that superior finish, which we like to have on every project that we make. So let's just press that down. Okay, so that's pressed. Just make sure that looks neat. So all we're going to do now, because obviously we do need to close the gap there in the lining, just going to push that in just a tiny bit more. That's better. And we can start just above the pocket itself, and let's see, so I'll just reverse there, and then I'm just going close to the edge. And you want to go fairly close because you need to know that this gap in the top of the flap is completely closed, and that both edges are being caught at the same time. So nice and slowly round that curve, and then reverse when we get back to the top of the purse again. So just clip those little bits of thread off there. There is our flap. All we need to do is tuck that flap under our closure, like so. And there is, let's pull that down even more, to the top there. That's it. And there is our purse. Let's just pull that over. And there we have our little purse. Now obviously you can make this bigger or smaller, and you will, if you make a narrower size, you would need a shorter strip for your closure piece there, the closure bar. And also you may need to fiddle about with measurements for turning up, but there's your little pouch. Keep whatever you like in there, and another nice easy project for your craft fair makes. Doesn't take too much fabric and doesn't take too long to put together. So just pop that under, And there we go. Thanks for watching.